We have spent the last year listening and talking to the Humentum community, our members, partners, and clients, about what our world of work might mean in the months and years ahead. Why change now? Because everything has been disrupted, so many things are possible. In other words, this is a transformative moment where an increase in virtual work and re-examinations of systemic power structures mean the way we work can never be the same. For us to make the most of this transformative moment, we need to understand what is happening in the global development sector as a result of these disruptions, so that we can change how we operate for the better. The pandemic initiated a three-phase journey of change: panic, fatigue, and redesign. How do we use our lessons learned along this journey to build back not just better, but differently? Change can be a scary, uncertain, and lonely place. It can also be hopeful, innovative, and exhilarating. There are choices to be made about what in our world of work we will continue as is, what we will strengthen, and what we will leave behind. Of course, change is not new. Even in stable times, things are always changing in a life cycle that begins as an idea, evolves from birth to maturity, and then ultimately goes through a process of creative destruction. Along the way, we may get stuck in traps, whether from lack of resources and a poverty trap, or because of resistance to change and a rigidity trap. As a sector, we are beginning to acknowledge the areas of our work that are ready for creative destruction, like office work, the role of headquarters, and how we travel, to make way for equally big ideas, like changing what our governance structures look like and decentralizing authority. As we listen to practitioners and leaders across the community, a picture is emerging of what reassembling our world of work might look like. Whereas before change might have happened in one of these areas, in today's world, we are being asked to adapt, if not transform, in all of them. What Humentum knows is that change will happen when we connect the big ideas to practical operations. Five big and unanswered questions have emerged. These are big questions, and they will take engagement at all levels of an organization, not just leadership. So, what does this all mean? How do we make sense of it all? As we stand on the precipice of change, we run the risk of falling back into old patterns instead of leaning into new ways of doing and thinking. In the past year, many deeply entrenched ways of working, like frequent travel to country offices, have been disrupted, making way for newly emerging or fragile okay states to take root. Prioritizing where we put our energy and putting the systems in place to prevent snapping back to old ways is a good start. We know that we need to get comfortable living in the tension of the many paradoxes that exist within the extremely complex space we are navigating. By their very nature, paradoxes will likely never be solved. A signal of complexity, there is power in falling in love with the problem. And we know that change will not come easily. The architecture of the global development sector itself is an obstacle for change. It has been remarkably resilient, rebounding from system shocks to return to the status quo, even as the sector itself has changed from its beginnings as charities charged with alleviating suffering to entities seeking to address root causes. Change to the structure of the sector will require enormous amounts of collective effort. Right now, the desire for change is very strong, but the ability to effect change is very difficult. Why? Because of resilience. There is resilience in the ability to maintain stability in the face of change, just as there is resilience in the ability to adjust and adapt when circumstances warrant. The architecture of the sector has been remarkably resilient over the years, like a bridge that sways in the wind but always returns to its stable equilibrium, the way that money, risk, culture, and norms form the ecosystem within which we operate, discourages radical change, and encourages stability. And yet there are moments in time where there is so much change, so many uncertainties and instabilities that the system cannot absorb it all and still sways back to center. When that tipping point happens, things are forced to adjust and adapt. If we know that we are navigating through a transformative moment in time, on the precipice of change in an environment that is at once always adapting and built within a structure designed to withstand change, the obvious question becomes, now what? At this juncture, there are two key actions that we must take together. The first, We must avoid snapping back to business as usual. For most, the fact that we must reimagine and reassemble how we work is no longer up for debate. The pressing question becomes how. As many organizations start to consider returning to offices and travel, the hard work will begin. Without extreme extenuating circumstances forcing change, what will prevent us from snapping back to business as usual? The second, we must act our way into the future. We must not discount the power of small, deliberate changes that take us in the right direction. Accepting this means accepting that every decision we make is a choice. So, what might this look like? Like most things, it all starts with individual people, understanding the roles that they play. Organizations can support changes to thinking and working by not just adding new voices to the table, but by creating entirely new spaces, ones that engage the difficult, uncomfortable conversations that must be had in order to move forward. And we can't stop there. We won't avoid snapping back without changes within our ecosystem, which includes our funders. Let's take the example of travel. You can see that in the life cycle of our sector, travel is one of our ways of working that is ready for creative destruction, allowing space for new ways of working and thinking. The last year has allowed us to recognize that a lot more is possible than we ever thought. A new norm for travel is beginning to emerge, one based on principles-based decision-making. The question becomes, as more staff get vaccinated and countries become safe to travel to, will we revert back to our old and comfortable ways? As the pandemic ends, do we try and take back control, increasing standard travel time from headquarters to country offices and projects? Or instead, do we lean into sharing power, building back different and better? What mechanisms do we put in place to ensure that the fragile okay state we are currently in becomes more entrenched, more resilient? What cultures do we form to hold each other accountable? Building back differently will mean building back deliberately. In the case of travel, it means asking the right questions and imagining what could and should be. And then it means connecting those big ideas with the practical operations that will ensure those new ideas take root. And who knows? Small changes that are connected to big ideas will add up over time. The change we have been anticipating is here. It is our choice whether we revert to the comfortable status quo or push on to reimagine what is possible, living and working in spaces of paradox and uncertainty. We are all connected together in the changes that we make as individuals, as organizations, and as policymakers working in an ecosystem. Because of that, we have no choice but to learn from each other and to collaborate together as we keep our eye on the big ideas and act our way into the future with each practical, operational challenge.